Hello, and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. This is one of our series of interviews with exciting creators and people who are working in the RPG industry. And in particular, we're talking with someone who has a Kickstarter up as of the drop of this program. And this is Misha Bushyager, and has a lot of credits. So Misha has worked on A Part-Time Gods, has worked on Chill, has worked on Lovecraft-esque, Misspent Youth, Dead Scare, #Feminism, and has a blog at blackgirlgameworks.com, right?
Yep.
Okay. And then is also the curator for a really interesting project, More Seats at the Table. We're going to come back to the blog and that Patreon project a little bit later. But particularly today, we're talking about your Kickstarter for Orun, which I've had a chance to run a session of. There's a great quick start of. So let me open it to you so you can tell us what Orun is. What's the pitch?
So Orun is an Afrofuturistic take on space opera. We are set thousands of years in the future in a galaxy far away where humans don't exist, but at one point grand beings called Orisha came and gave the secret of ascending to a different plane to the peoples of the universe at the time. And then something happened and all of that knowledge was lost, and so now you're not quite rebuilding society, but you're trying to rediscover that glory that was once there. And as you do so, you're playing a group of characters called Jolly, which is a Yoruban word for leader or teacher. And you're going through the galaxy and you're solving problems. You're mediating disputes. You're that neutral third party when somebody needs somebody, an extra set of eyes on a project or something going on. And so far, it's been doing pretty well. We're at a little under 17,000, or a little over 17,000 at the last I checked. We've gotten we've got 11 total species funded, and they're included homeworlds as well as some other homeworlds and that you'll be able to play from in the full version. And it's been pretty exciting.
Now, the subtitle for it, I want to ask you about the two parts of that. Mm-hmm. What does it mean for something to be and I'm going to say this terribly wrong, apotheosis?
Apotheosis. So an apotheosis is a leap forward in technology or time or civilization level, basically. Mm-hmm. So that would have been the gaining the knowledge of ascension. So we're now post that event, which is where we get the post-apotheosis from.
And then the other half is Afrofuturist, which has been more common in recent years. We've seen that in music with Janelle Monáe, and we've seen more fiction, certainly, of that. But how do you picture what Afrofuturist means in the context of this game?
So we're dealing with some of the concepts of diaspora and the spread of not humanity, but civilization or a certain way of being throughout a space. Also, some of our concepts and our terminology and our wording is coming from Yoruban and Igbo and stories that come from those cultures as well. So we're kind of blending all of that together and into this kind of take on what a future could be.
And it's a space opera, which is an interesting territory given how white classic space opera is. What made you decide to go that direction? What started this whole project?
So what started it, we're sitting around, we're shooting the breeze, we're throwing ideas at each other, and we start talking about Star Wars and Star Trek and our love of it. And this was before Solo came out, which I'm still very annoyed about. And before, it was after The Force Awakens, though, and I think it was it was right around when The Last Jedi came out, I think. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about it. It's like, yeah, Star Wars is really white. So is Star Trek. And it's like, but I really still love those properties. It's like, okay, well, let's take the best of those worlds and what it is we liked about them, and let's make something new out of it. And so that's where we started from. Mm-hmm.
And who is the we? You have a couple of great co-authors here.
I do. We actually have 11 authors.
Oh! In
addition to my two partners, Aloy Lasanta and Jerry Grayson. So the we was me, Jerry, and Aloy sitting around BSing. But we have a small cast. We put out an open call for writers back in May, I believe it was. And we got a good 60 or so submissions.
Wow.
We whittled it down to 10 of them and got 11 writers from that. So they're a pretty diverse group. They're amazingly fun to work with. They brought some amazing ideas to the table, and it's been a joy to work with them.
So one of the things that's really striking about Orun, besides the way you use language and names and so on, is the art is very distinct, striking. It definitely, we can see some of the Afrofuturist imagery in there, but it's also really alien in a way I haven't seen in a lot of games. How did you go about getting that kind of art direction and so on?
So that's all Jerry. We did decide early on that we didn't want humans to be a playable species in the game. We wanted to take humanity out of it completely. So we said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, let's go full on alien. Let's make our bug people not look like humans, but with bug parts. Let's not make any of our species look like humans, but let's not do the Star Trek, we're going to just put rubber prosthetics on a person and that's going to be the thing. Let's make them look like what they are. So I was like, all right, no, bugs don't have boobs. We're just going to cut that out right now. Sorry, only mammals get boobs. Let's make our sea creatures like really alien sea creatures. And so we gave our direction to our artists, and we gave them pretty loose guidelines. It's like, hey, we don't want it to look like, just mermaids and that. We want it to look really different and alien. And they came back with some amazing stuff. And we were so, I was like, I wasn't expecting it, but I love it. And so it was a pleasant surprise.
And you've got, I've only seen the 5 species that are in the quick start. But if you've got, I know we've got 11 and more coming. What would you say is the one that you're like, okay, this is the one that strikes me as the most interesting, the one I would want to play, or the one I want to sell to people?
They're all, I like all of them. My personal favorite, and when we were thinking of the different species, the one that I kind of fell in love with a little was the Hollowan, which to me were kind of supposed to be like the Mystics from Dark Crystal. So kind of slow and quadrupedal, but most of their abilities come forward through mental processes. So they use a lot of telepathy. They use a lot of telekinesis to communicate and to move. And so that's my personal favorite. Mm-hmm. My second would probably be the Karok, which we've kind of, I kind of envision as like little bitty Ewok teddy bear kind of types, but in giant mechs with bad attitudes.
Oh, wow.
So that's my second favorite. So it's like, depends on which mood I'm in. Am I in I'm going to kick butt and take names mood, or am I in oh no, we're going to be calm and chill and peaceful kind of mood? And
bear down a little bit on the mechanical questions here. You've got a solid 2d10 system, essentially skill plus a kind of stat. And one thing that struck me is this trials system for experience you've gotten there. Can you explain that? Because it's not something I've seen quite before.
Sure. So there's 2 things that are in play. One is the skills that you mentioned. And to raise a skill, you fail at a skill. When you fail at a skill, you mark it off. And when you get to a number of failures plus 1 of the level that you have, you can advance the skill to the next level. The other, though, is the auras. And the auras kind of stand in for stats. They are 5 areas of control that your character has, and to advance those, we have what are called trials. So, for example, if you're trying to advance your war stat, you might have to do something that is connected to war, but not necessarily in the way you would think. So, to advance your war stat, you have to negotiate a peace, or you have to not fight when you really want to. You're basically honing your auras by doing things that make you need to use them less, in a sense. And so we kind of like that dichotomy of you learn best not by succeeding, but by failing, or by doing something that isn't necessarily going to be that stat's strong point. Mm-hmm. Negotiating peace is not necessarily the strong point of war, but by negotiating peace, you learn about your opponent more. So that's where the trial system came from.
And in addition to this whole idea of challenging those auras, you actually use the stats not only as sort of an absolute roll, but you also have them as a resource that gets spent, which is different.
Yeah, so one of the things you can do is you have a certain number of points in your auras equivalent to what your total of it is. You could use that to boost a roll. You can use that to activate a scene boon, which is like you walk into a scene and there's something that might be able to help you. But also, you take damage off of those auras first before you get to your wounds. So as you progress and become more in tune with yourself and closer to Ascension, you also become a little tougher, a little harder to damage. It takes longer to get you to the point where you're actually injured.
Okay. And another point about the XP is you've got players actually start with 2 XP they can give away, right?
Yeah, I am very much a story games kind of person and I have played entire sessions of games where nobody picked up dice, but we still advanced the story. So one of the things we were trying to encourage was that communication and listening to the players around you and seeing things that connecting with the other players and the other characters as well. So one of the things we did was we gave you points that you could give to the other players towards their advancement that were for, hey, you did this cool thing. I thought it was really awesome. Here you go. Or you were a team player. I know you weren't really thinking that plan was going to work, but thanks for going along with it anyway. So it's kind of encouraging you to pay attention to the table and to read the table and to keep working with your players as well.
And you've got another sort of, I would say, story gaming mechanic with the relative successes. You've got hitches, and then I can't remember what the term is for the other side of that. The
edges.
Is it edges? And edges are an really interesting play currency that when I was running it, once the players kind of got a hold of it, they were like, oh, this is really fun. We're limited to 4, so we need to spend them to get these effects and bonuses. And then hitches are a currency that you're giving the GM to cause problems, right?
Yeah.
And how have you seen the GM use those?
So hitches can be used to activate a scene boon on the GM side as well. So like, let's say you're walking into a room that's a hangar bay and there's wires sparking. So if the GM has a hitch, they might use that to, hey, all of a sudden your path is blocked by this thing and you have to get around it. Whereas if the players had activated that boon, it would have fallen the other way and then revealed a new way out of the situation. So that's the main way I've been using it. But you can use it just like you can use an edge to bump up a roll. The GM can use a hitch to bump up the roll for the non-player characters. Little things like that. It's meant to be, hey, we can make this more challenging for the players, but not necessarily, hey, we could defeat the players with these. And
I like that it's a voluntary currency, that it isn't a release valve for the GM there.
Yeah.
So on the space opera side, of course, when we think about all these space games, we've got a couple of aspects. How are you handling sort of tech and technology? How are those being dealt with in the game? Are they talents? Are they equipment? Where do you see that happening?
They're mostly equipment. We did have a couple of writers who did a bunch of expansion on it. We kept it science fiction-y, but not hard science-y. Mm-hmm. So it's about the same level as your Star Wars sci-fi, where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe this stuff could exist. Whereas Star Trek, it's like all the scientific concepts they throw out are based on some scientific principle. So more wars and tech in that sense, in that. So you've got your laser guns and your tachyon beam thingies and all kinds of things that go that way. But one of the core concepts was this concept of Orisha tech, where the Orisha were the beings that came and brought the knowledge of Ascension. They left behind and created hyper advanced technology that the players can still find and use and work with. And so there's some really interesting examples of that woven throughout the book as well.
Now, the Orisha came back after this mimetic virus. Some of them returned back after their sort of ascension, and then some of them stayed, and there's a particular term for them.
Yeah, so the Uluru are those who had ascended before that came back to work with the universe to help continue it forward to ascension. And they are kind of like the head of the Jolly. They're the ones that kind of give out the assignments and do the training and that sort of thing. And they do have their own planet that they've retreated to mostly.
Oh, okay.
That it's kind of like the jolly homeworld.
Are they to kind of like act like a patron kind of figure for the characters?
More of a they don't necessarily go out in the world themselves anymore so much as send the jolly out to do the work for them.
And two questions sort of together. How does spaceship travel work in the game? And then what kind of systems mechanics do you have in place for, I mean, it's a space game, so people are going to ask about space combat.
So if I remember correctly, we do have some light rules for ships. We're probably going to make ship combat and ships themselves an expansion later where we have more words to cover it. For now, it's mostly an expansion of the regular combat system where you're using your ship systems to substitute for your own auras. The ship will have its own set of aura skills and points that it'll use for the combat in space.
Let me swing back to two of the other projects that I mentioned at the start that you've worked on, and then I want to talk sort of more generally about RPGs from this. So at your blog, you're doing a game fiction of some kind, right?
Yeah, so some of it is thinly veiled me ranting at the ether about issues I'm seeing coming up in gaming with a very thin gloss of fiction over it. Some of it is background and little bits that come to me after I've played a game or while I'm playing a game that are inspired by the characters that are in that game. And then some of it's just straight up me yelling at people. Because sometimes people need to be yelled at.
Yeah, I do want to point out that you are one of the most interesting and thoughtful voices on the soon-to-be disappearing G+. And I always appreciate when I see you pop into a conversation and redirect it or clarify points, bring your voice to bear on that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm going to miss G+. I don't know.
Yeah.
Haven't decided what we're going to do yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in the Gauntlet about how we handle that. The other project that you're part of is this Patreon, More Seats at the Table. Can you tell us what that is and how that came about?
Sure. So More Seats at the Table is a newsletter. It's bi-weekly. It highlights games by women and non-binary creators. You can submit a project to be featured on it. There's links for that. And we have a Patreon that helps us support the costs of doing the MailChimp and all that fun stuff. But mostly we saw a need, and there's four of us. There's me, Anna Kreider, Kira McGrahan, and Kim Lamb. We were seeing that a lot of times, especially at awards and things, the people who are getting spotlighted are all dudes. And we were just kind of like, all right, what can we do about that? You know, why is it that, hey, this book, it came out, it's nominated for awards, but we're not seeing it at shows? You know, why are all of the designers that we see nominated dudes? Why are all the Wikipedia articles about designers primarily about dudes? And there's a serious dearth of non-dude designer Wikipedia pages, and that used to apparently be by design. So,
wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Apparently, whoever was doing some of the editing had some kind of beef. I don't know. And so a lot of times it was like, what do you mean? And then some of it is the requirements for having your own Wikipedia page are strange. Like, you have to be cited in some scholarly articles and stuff like that. And like, they're game designers. Like, scholarly articles are yeah. Anyway, so we wanted to make sure that we were seeing games by women, and we were seeing games by non-binary people, and we were seeing games from voices that we weren't necessarily hearing a lot of in the discourse. And so, like I said, it goes out every 2 weeks. And we take submissions, but we also do our own searching. You know, it's like, we troll through Kickstarter, we troll through Patreon, looking for, hey, who's here that we haven't heard from? Whose voice have we not heard from in the larger dialogue? And we've got a couple of hundred subscribers at this point.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, they every couple of weeks they get a thing. It's like, hey, here's some Kickstarters that are coming out. Here's some Patreons you might want to follow. Here's some podcasts you might think are cool. Hey, you remember this game? This game was really cool. And we try to keep it to those four categories of, something new, something old, something that you can listen to, and someplace you can support.
So this last year has been interesting in that we've seen a number of Black creators have a stronger representation. We've seen certainly Mike Pondsmith, Artel Sorian is doing more, both with Cyberpunk getting a lot more attention and this picking up of The Witcher. We've seen Chris Spivey's Harlem Unbound. We saw Mythic D6 do a successful Kickstarter. We saw Whitney Delagio with her really wonderful Prism. Do you think that, does it feel like things are moving forward, or I know some people have talked about still some pushback on that?
So it's kind of amusing. When we first announced that we were forming a company and working, there was a lot of pushback. And it's not even a ton. Like, there was a thread on RPG.net, and there was a thread on InWorld, and some of it's very...
Like when you say threat, what do you mean? I've talked to Jason about this, and I know that as his role as a POC and a gay man, he gets a lot of stuff that he doesn't talk about at the Gauntlet, of pushback and direct messages and things like that. So can you give me a sense of what the shape of that looks like? So
some of it is stuff like, hey, well, I've never cared what the person who's making my games look like, or why do you feel the need to call out what race you are, or, oh, well, all the way to the other end of like, yeah, this is going to be, I certainly won't buy any games from Black, gay, trans, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, wow, that's just really a screed. But a lot of it is, on the one hand, when you call for more representation, you get told to make your own thing. And then when you go and make your own thing, you get called for not including more white dudes. And so it's like, well, I can't have it both ways, so we're going to do it mine. And we're going to highlight the people we want to highlight. And if you don't like it, you can go pound sand. And so that's kind of, as I've gotten older, I think that's become more my attitude. I've got kids, and I worry more about them than I do about what other people think of me. And I think that's worked out pretty well for me.
Well, let me ask you this. How did you come to gaming? How did you come to RPGs?
So I first started playing when I got to college. One afternoon, we went to see a movie, me and my buddy, and we're waiting for the movie to start, and neither of us had cars, so we're kind of dependent on the MARTA and the schedule it had. And we are sitting there waiting for the movie to start. It was Mortal Kombat, by the way.
Oh, good.
And we look over, and there's these guys, and they've got dice and a book, and they're waiting for the movie to start, too. So, we're in the food court sitting around chilling, so we wander over. It's like, what are you doing? And they invited us to play the next day at the Student Center back at Georgia Tech, because it turns out they were students too. And so that was Earth Dawn, and that's where I got started. And I played pretty much throughout the rest of college for a good 10 years or so. And then when I moved, I had stopped playing for a while because, I don't want to be the creepy old guy who goes to the college campus to find a gaming group. But it was still, so it's like, all right, well, where do I find a gaming group? And then I didn't come back to it till my daughter was about 2 or 3. And one of the other parents at the playground that she went to after school happens to live down the street from me and happened to be reading, I think it was Vampire. It was a gaming book that I recognized as a gaming book. I was like, hey, and so that's how I got back into gaming. So that's been about 8 years now.
Oh, wow.
I've been back. So, yeah.
Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know we have just kicked off Volume 3 of the Codex RPG zine. Can you believe it? The first issue in Volume 3 is Codex Flame. Here's what you'll find inside. Fire Ships at Midnight, a 3-player game that tells the story of the failed invasion of England by the Spanish Armada in 1588. A Handful of Ashes, a LARP about grieving and letting go. Like Matches to Paper Dolls, a play-by-mail game about love, longing, and missed connections. The Miscellany, 3 dozen separated lovers, 5 original illustrations, and a custom layout by our new layout artist, Jake Householder. You can get Codex Flame by making a $4 or higher pledge at the Gauntlet Patreon, which is at patreon.com/gauntlet. And a quick reminder, we are currently running a Kickstarter campaign for the Codex Volume 1 hardcover book. That campaign ends on October 28th. Thanks.
So, how do you think gaming has treated African themes in the past?
Horribly.
So yeah, and that's first. what do you think the issues are with that? And this is something we talked about at the panel a little bit, but I want to come back to it. And then maybe some examples of people doing better with that.
So 90% of the time when you see any sort of African-themed something, it's from the point of, oh, hey, yeah, we've built medieval Europe, and yeah, if you want to go to medieval Africa too, here it is. Or, it's been an add-on. It's been something that's bolted on afterwards. And then within that, usually the representation is pretty sketchy at best. It doesn't, Africa is a continent made up of hundreds of different tribal groups, and they're each pretty diverse. So when you try to lump that all into mythic Africa, it doesn't really work because it's very different on, let's say, the East Coast than it is on the West Coast versus Sub-Sahara versus, Northern Africa. They're all very different cultures. And so when you try to just mush them all into one, it doesn't work. It's the same problem you have when you start introducing Native Americans into it, and you just kind of treat them all as, oh, well, all Native Americans are the same. No, they aren't. They really aren't. Or all of Asia is the same. No, it's completely not. Koreans will be very insulted if you call them Japanese or Chinese. It's not. That's just no. So by making it abstract and by making it in space, one of the things we did with Orun was we were able to pull on some of the themes that we wanted to pull on without making it about any particular African country or without making it about any particular tribe or group. And I think there's a few RPGs out there now that are better at making African themes the center rather than the expansion. Niobe, She Is Life is one that Paizo and Pathfinder are kind of working with. They got Amanda Stanberg is helping to write it, and it's beautiful artwork. It's wonderfully done. I think the second volume is kickstarting now. Jerry's Mythic D6 and Bastion are another good example of ones that I think have done well. There have been a few that have done a better job of making the culture the center as opposed to the add-on, which is where I think you kind of need to do it, as opposed to your Kindred of the East, where it's like, wow, let's just not, just no, kind of oddness going on.
So if people are interested in Afrofuturist themes, what would be the places you'd recommend outside of gaming? What are the books, pieces of art, sources that you would tell people to look for?
Sure. N.K. Jemisin is a great place to start. She just won her third Hugo in a row, which has never been done before. And her series are brilliant. Octavia Butler is, of course, a perennial favorite of mine. Her work with Fledgling, and a vampire from that kind of African background was mind-blowing. Nende Okorafor, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I'm sorry. Does amazing work. She's got a couple of series of books out that are Akata Witch is one series that's just brilliant. The aforementioned Niobe is a good comics one. Yeah, those are all good places to start if you're looking for fiction to read. On Twitter, if you follow any of those, well, obviously you're not going to be able to follow Octavia Butler, but if you follow any of the others on Twitter, they usually have great ways of steering you towards they're pretty good at also hyping diverse creators as well, so you see a lot of things that way.
I'm going to kind of flip back to an earlier question about RPGs. Do you think that representation in art has gotten better across the board for RPGs, or with a few companies, or is it just incremental?
I'd say it's incremental. There are some companies that are doing a lot better. There are some companies who have not changed much at all. I find that the bigger companies are either doing really well or they think they're doing really well. Which is a subtle distinction. And it's one of the things that I do when I'm GMing. It's, all right, take all of your artwork, organize it into groups, make sure that all of your heroes aren't white and all your villains aren't black. Okay, do the same thing with women, So when you're doing what I find is a lot of times, and this happens in movies too, is they'll start with a idea and then they'll realize, oh wait, I didn't add any diversity, and so the villain will be a black or brown person or a woman because they were centering the white guy too much. And a lot of the RPG books are still doing that too. It's like, oh, I had all this great art. Oh crap, I don't have enough black people, or I don't have enough Asian people. Oh, what do I need? We'll make them NPCs or villains. So that's still an issue. So you're seeing a lot more faces, but they're always presented as faces that are evil or not heroes, or they're the sassy sidekick, which is just as annoying to me. So I think, like I said, some are doing better and some just think they're doing better.
Besides those companies, and I'll include this in this question, but what can gaming communities be doing better in terms of helping to support POC creators or POC players or GMs? What are some tactics or tools that we should be looking at?
The easiest one is just listen. I mean, a lot of times somebody will say something and it'll get lost in the noise. Or, you'll look at a thread on G+ or somewhere and it's like, all right, I've got a question for my POC friends. And it'll be white guy, 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 white guy. It's like, all right, well, if somebody asks, hey, I want to hear from people of color, don't chime in if you're not a person of color. Or if somebody asks, I want to hear from women, don't chime in if you're not a woman. So start with listening skills. And then second would be just, read their work. If they've got a Patreon, feel free to throw some money their way if you have it. If you don't have it, just hype their Patreon or their Twitter feed. Or if somebody says something particularly insightful, reboost it, reblog it, repost it, making sure to give them credit for it. But make sure that you're not talking over them, so amplify their words as opposed to adding your own.
Awesome. I want to come to one last question, and I'm going to actually swing back to Orun for this. Well, actually, two questions I've got.
All right.
Because I love this idea. One, can you tell us what the Orun are?
So Orun are the planets that the Orisha created for the different species that were meant to be these utopian worlds that were perfect for them. So at the moment there are, I think, 10 Oruns because a couple of them got destroyed in the Sapona War. But Orun is a Yoruban word. It means home. So they're perfect planets for the species that was the dominant species on the planet. So the Orisha came in, they kind of destroyed the old one to make it, but that's beside the point. Here we gave you something better. It's way cooler. So they're still littered with technology that's been working this whole time, and some of it is nobody who's still around knows exactly what it does. It just, hey, it's been working this whole time, we're gonna leave it alone. And sometimes that stuff breaks and maybe somebody has to figure out how to fix it. That's certainly a thread that people can pull that we encourage. But they're described as floating Dyson spheres with a small sun inside of them. So imagine a wiffle ball,
right,
with a BB in it. So on the inside of the sphere, it's habitable. On the outside of the sphere, it's habitable. And there's this tiny sun floating in the middle.
Okay. Second question: why square?
So originally,
and I say this because the book is square, which is such a striking form factor.
Because we're dorks, primarily. So when we originally started, there were 4 of us. And Chris had to step back along the way. So 3 of us were going forward. So you'll see a lot of 4s. 4 was what we took as our sacred number. So you'll see a lot of 4s repeated or multiples of 4 going throughout. Like we launched on 10-8. We were going to end on 11, or sorry, we launched on 10-16. We're going to end on 11-16, which is 4 times 4. I almost woke up at like 4:04 to launch it, but I decided I wanted to sleep at 11. So instead we launched at 8:08. So we took 4 as our sacred number. And so 4 being square also kind of worked out that way.
And you've already hit a number of stretch goals. What are a few of the stretch goals you still kind of have coming up on the table that people should be excited about?
So the ones that we have left, we've got a few more authors lined up to help us add little bits of worldcraft to it. Bree Sheldon, for example, is the next up. They're going to be adding a world that's kind of a horror-themed world. Nicole Winchester is going to build out a merchant house for us that's kind of focused on fashion and how that is interpreted through the different species. So little things like that that'll be adding to the worlds that we've already created and kind of making them richer.
Wow. And there's a lot more we could talk about. Certainly, the quick start is really solid. It's beautifully done. You've got a nice, sharp story in there. You've got the good minimal rules. There are other mechanics like the reputation system that you've got in there that are really interesting. All these things. I recommend everybody go and download it because it's solid.
Yeah, the quick start's available. Pay what you want on drive-through, so you can download a copy now. Or if you back the Kickstarter, we should hopefully have it out in people's hands by February. So, because it's pretty much written at this point. We're just kind of editing it and polishing it and doing the artwork and stuff now.
Misha, thank you for talking with us, and thank you, listeners. That's our show. Remember to kind of. You can check out all of our podcasts, Discern Realities, Fear of a Black Dragon, Plus One Forward, Pocket Size Play. You can find all those at gauntlet-rpg.com. We've got a blog there that's ongoing with a number of exciting pieces, including our video roundups for weekly games and so on. And, of course, you can check out our online gaming community there. And if you're listening to this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe. I hope maybe you'll think about rating or even leaving a review on various sites. Misha, thank you again for being willing to come on here and talk with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And listeners, that's our show.